Generally, is back. Chair recognizes himself. Mr. Michel, if the government's going to go get information from banks, and understand what happened in this particular situation and in other situations, the government goes to the bank and says, I want the name of the customer who's making purchases in a certain date time, and I want the name of the customer who may have bought a firearm at any time. If they're going to do that, do you think they need to get a warrant first?
Do I think they should?
Yes.
Well, yes.
Mr. Tedesco, do you think they need to get a warrant to do that?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Fanone, do you think they need to get a warrant?
I apologize. Sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Government goes to a bank and says, I want the name of the customer who made purchases on these specific dates and may have bought a firearm at any time. Should there be a warrant requirement before the bank has to be compelled by the government to give that information? Should there be a warrant requirement first?
I mean, in my experience, I always sought voluntary compliance. It's less paperwork. That being said, if I was unable to...
Wait. Voluntary compliance?
Correct.
How's it voluntary? This is the third party. The bank's giving it.
No, if I go to the bank and request certain information regarding an investigation that I'm participating in...
I'm just saying in a fundamental sense, do you think there should be a warrant requirement before some financial institution hands over the name of the customer based on certain purchases they may have made? So in a general sense.
Yes.
You think there should be?
Yes.
That's great, because your colleagues don't think so. Now, let me go to this. Do you think, Mr. Michel, that if it can't do a warrant, do you think there should be at least a notification? So should at least the bank say, hey, Mr. Smith, the FBI just asked me for all your purchases on a certain date, and they want to know if you've ever bought a gun. Do you think that the bank should at least tell their customer who they're supposed to serve? Do you think they should at least be compelled to tell them that?
Yes.
Mr. Tedesco?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes, with reasonable exceptions for an ongoing criminal case.
Fair enough. Mr. Peterson?
They should get a warrant.
They should get a warrant. Back to the first thing. Mr. Falone?
Again, with exceptions for criminal investigations.
We got agreement on the panel. The first time we've had that this morning. Dr. Peterson, I want you to talk about the debanking issue we saw so much of, and how that was, particularly, I guess, with the truckers, and how that's, because I see it coming. I see it coming here, and it frightens me. I want you to talk about what took place in Canada and if it in any way impacted you.
Well, there was essentially a working class protest against the extensive length of the COVID lockdowns. And one consequence of that was that Canadians who participated, even by donating to the protest and even by donating small amounts to the protest, had their bank accounts seized in consequence of a collusion between the banks and the government that was extrajudicial, that was recently deemed unconstitutional, despite the fact that we don't have strong First Amendment claims. So this happened. The government is currently maneuvering in Canada to make the possibility of such collusion a certainty across multiple actual and potential domains of so-called harm, particularly in relationship to government-defined hate. Yes, this is absolutely coming. And it's facilitated by the kinds of advancements in technology that we talked about today.
Yeah, we know it's coming because we've seen what do they call it? The liaison information report from the FBI to the banks saying possibly include firearm legislation, the easing of immigration status, new limits on public land, and discontent with renewed measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So the very issue that these truckers were debanked in Canada is the very thing the government is saying to banks, we need to look at this as well. That single issue. That is, again, what frightens me so much. And frankly, when you're getting this information, if you're going to get it, why you should be compelled to get the warrant before you go get it. Mr. Knight, jump right in.
I want to clarify one part of my answer to the second question about notification.
Yep.
The Right to Financial Privacy Act, I think, does a good job of this, where notification can be delayed, but the government has to go to a court and get permission to delay. I think if we're going,
you shift the burden.
Yeah,
the burden's where it should be on the government to go get it from a court.
Absolutely, and I do believe that there should be a warrant requirement, so the notification would only be delayed in that event.
In this world we're now in, the full committee, as I said, I think I may have mentioned earlier, on the Pfizer reauthorization, we have said the same thing. If you're going to go search American citizens based on their phone number, their email address, in this haystack of information that's out there, if you're going to do that, go get a warrant. And we're having the same fight there. But it seems to me that getting a warrant, Fourth Amendment constitutional right, is how it has to be handled. My time is expired. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Yield to Mr. Jordan.
I think John for you. Mr. Knight, do you need a gun registration list if government can just go ask the banks every time some customer purchases a gun?
Well, the banks won't know if you purchased a gun per se, but your bank records can be a pretty good, though not perfect, registration for almost anything.
But my point is, it's almost like a backdoor registration, right?
Yes, one of the challenges is that highly sensitive information can be accessed through financial records that otherwise is constitutionally protected.
Yeah, Dr. Peterson, do you think they're just going to stop with conservatives? I mean, my history tells us that the cancel culture mob, the surveillance state, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't just, they never are satisfied with just certain people. It always expands. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, Senator Feinstein, iconic Democrat senator from the great state of California, the folks in San Francisco renamed the Dianne Feinstein Elementary School. They took her name off the school because they found that she said something like 40 years ago that the cancel culture mob didn't like. So even a liberal Democrat senator wasn't good enough for the mob. They came after her too. And this is the thing that scares me. We've invited probably more Democrat witnesses in front of this committee than any other committee, because we invite Democrats to come in and say, we respect the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, respect the Constitution. My concern is it never just stops with certain people. It always goes further. Do you agree with that?
Well, the reason I prefaced my remarks with an insistence on nonpartisanship is because the danger posed by this increasing ability of governments and large corporations to collude threatens everyone's freedom equally. And it could well be that at the moment, and this is, I think, the case the Republicans here are trying to make, is that the people who are in the sights of that collusion tend to have more conservative leanings, but that will shift in a moment whenever the political tides shift. And we're concentrating in this hearing a fair bit on the specific events of January 6th, a very partisan issue that produces a very intense partisan divide, but we're not addressing the fundamental issue here directly, which is that our new technology enables a mode of surveillance that's so intense and all-pervading that no one will escape its purview regardless of their political views.
No, I think that's exactly right. And there also seems to me, and I'll go to Mr. Tedesco, there seems to be a pattern emerging. I'm going to take you back to when we first kind of started getting into this issue with the somewhat famous now school board's memorandum from the Department of Justice. And I know you probably remember what I'm talking about here, Mr. Tedesco. But the opening sentence of the Attorney General's document, this memorandum, says, in recent months, there's been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats of violence against school administrators, board members, teachers, staff who participate in the vital work of running our nation's public schools. At the hearing where we had the Attorney General, I asked him a simple question. I said, you make that opening statement as the basis for why you need this memorandum to go after moms and dads showing up at school board meetings. What was that first sentence based on? And he told us it was based on the National School Boards Association, the memorandum they put out. And the same thing happened to you guys, because we had some entity here called the Global Disinformation Index puts out this information, and then the government uses that information as the basis to say you're some terrorist group. That is frightening, that our government, because FinCEN, the Treasury Department, used what some agency put out, or not agency, some entity put out as a basis to say you guys are some hate group or some terrorist group. Yep. I find that alarming, and particularly the pattern that it, I guess two doesn't make a pattern, but it sure makes you start to wonder. Your thoughts, Mr. Tedesco?
Sure. The FBI used the SPLC's report on radical traditional Catholics to target them as well in the interim between the Moms for Liberty and parental rights groups and what's going on today. I think it's very alarming that the government uses these obviously partisan and discredited third-party, arbiters of truth who really are just promoting their own political agenda and trying to do damage to their perceived political enemies to make decisions about anything, let alone sending them to financial institutions as part of some kind of financial surveillance scheme.
Yeah. Some left-wing group says you're bad. Oh, then the government's going to use that information to send out to banks and say, you might want to be concerned about this. You maybe want to debank these individuals. That is a frightening world. And the point is, I don't think it's going to be just limited to conservative people in the future. Because we've already seen examples. There were people in Black Lives Matter who got targeted during the summer of 2020 when all the protests were happening around the country. And I disagree with some of the things, a lot of the things that happened that summer, but I also don't like the fact that they're going after liberals either. That's the scary thing. And then there used to be an agreement in both parties that First Amendment activity should be protected. Second Amendment.
you.